Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Hockey Writers season previews. We are now up to the Philadelphia Flyers, and I'm joined by Justin Giampietro, who's been covering the Flyers for a while now at the Hockey Writers. Hey, Justin, how you doing? It's summer, how have things been going for you?
I mean, the only thing I'm worried about is I'm excited for the season to start. Right now it's still 2 months out as we're recording this, but I'm happy to be on. I'm happy to preview the team. It's a really exciting time for the Flyers, finally. It feels like it's been forever.
It does feel that way. I kind of want to ask about that because the Flyers enter the season a unique spot. We know how last season went, where they were good in the first half. It looked like, oh wow, Tortorella's got this rebuild. Briere's got this whole thing planned out. They're poised for a playoff spot. They fall apart in the second half. Some people would still say they're a rebuilding team. Some people would still say no, they're ready to compete now. Where are the Flyers based on one last season heading into this season? Really, all the offseason stuff. Also, where do you see the Flyers heading into the season?
Well, to me, a huge indicator of their direction was the Travis Konechny extension in the offseason. If you're rebuilding, I find it hard to justify giving a player of his age, a player with who plays the style he does, doesn't really tend to age well as you get into the 30s, the mid 30s. They give him an 8-year deal. He's going to be 28 when that starts. To me, that indicates, you're kind of going for this. Obviously, we're going to get into it. Matvei Michkov is here. He's in
Yeah,
Philly. Um, I feel like they kind of, want to build around him. They said that him coming over is not really going to alter their process, but you had a team that almost made the playoffs. You add a player like that and you kind of keep your roster intact. I feel like I would call it a retool. They're trying to get younger. Um, their draft, they stockpiled picks for this upcoming season, so it'll be interesting to see what they do with that.
yeah, and you mentioned Konechny, you mentioned Michkov, those really are the two forwards that dominate the storylines. I guess heading the season because for the way a lot of people look at the Flyers, Michkov's here. He's the guy. He's the next player to build around. He's the player that they're gonna build their forward unit around. But what looking at them because most hockey fans, I guess, know about Travis Konechny because they wanted them. They put trade rumors out, putting them Konechny on their team at some point. Doesn't look like that's going to be happening. Most people know about maybe Farabee, maybe I mean they know about Michkov, they know about how he's coming up into the ranks. What is the big storyline of the forward unit? What are the main themes or storylines of the forward group coming into the season?
Well, I think your biggest one and the big one that I think a lot of people on more so the outside media are looking at are how the relationship between John Tortorella, a very defensive heavy, 200-foot game kind of coach, and then you add a player like Michkov whose biggest weakness coming out of the KHL was kind of his defense. I mean, I'm not too concerned about his defense personally, but it is a weakness of his game right now. And really, me personally, this is just me. I'm not too concerned about it. That relationship. I mean, those are two big personalities. Maybe they clash a little bit. That's really where I'd come from. That's where my worry would be. But in terms of the whole defensive thing, I think something that people need to realize is how lenient Tortorella can be when it comes to that stuff. You look at a player like Konechny, he was never uh, good defensively before Tortorella, but he really shifted his game into an offensive role. He is today a gambler. He loves to anticipate the play, um, and sometimes he sacrifices chances in the defensive zone. When he does that, there's plenty of film showing him, I guess, being very aggressive. A lot of the time, it really did help the Flyers' offense, but sometimes, they give up a goal here and there. But it was worth it to Tortorella, and he didn't bench Konechny when he made these mistakes. No, he encourages these actions. So with Michkov, he kind of plays a similar style in that way. So I wouldn't really be too, I guess, worried about the whole defensive thing. I mean, there are some ways in which he can improve, and it'll be a battle, I think. But ultimately, I'm not too worried about that, that storyline, but it will be something to monitor.
Yeah. Is with Michkov and with Konechny, is this forward unit, is this group ready to compete with the rest of the Eastern Conference, or what do you think are the biggest issues? I mean, do they have is do they have like their center position figured out? What are their issues forward unit wise, or is it a unit ready to compete?
Well, there are some pros and cons with the forward core. First of all, they were only 27th goal in terms of goals. They were second last in shooting percentage. They didn't shoot very well, and they overall just weren't, I guess, very great offensively. But I think the big issue is your center depth there. People look at somebody like Couturier. Um, he is your first line center entering this season, and he showed a lot of promise. In the first half, he was really like genuinely a good first line center. But then he suffered a sports hernia somewhere along there. He didn't specify when exactly that was, but I'm guessing January, February. That's just my speculation around that area. And after that, just that's when your collapse started. I mean, there were other reasons for that, but not having a true first line center that destroyed them. So if Couturier is not healthy, that's an issue. Um, I mean, other than that, it's not a particularly great center forward, but it is, I guess, passable because you have a lot of good wingers. You have Tyson Forrester, you have Owen Tippett, who I think could take a step up this year. Obviously Konechny, we talked about Farabee a little bit. Um, so yeah, there are some pieces there. And one last point I want to get to is um, the Flyers finally have a shutdown line. They haven't had that to me, in years. Like I can't remember the last time they've had a true defensive line that they could rely on, that they could put out in all situations. Um, we can't be exactly confident how much John Tortorella will use the line of Noah Cates, Ryan Paling, and Garnet Hathaway. That was their really big shutdown line toward the second half of the year, and it was very successful. They were taking on big minutes, more than those guys should probably be taking on, but they were reliable. So that's just like another aspect of the forward core, I think. So it's more so defensively minded, I guess, in
Yeah.
that way. But there are pros, there are cons. But overall, you want to be, I guess, a little bit more skeptical about that core.
Yeah, and I think having a defense line like that is great for Tortorella, just because
Hmm.
if he if he's not happy with the way Mishkov's playing or the way um Konechny is playing, they're struggling at defensive end, he has no problem benching them for a few shifts and playing that defensive forward group and for a few shifts. I guess shifting to the defensive unit, there is some there. You look at that unit, it's a lot of promise, a lot of young, good skaters. I mean, Drysdale's the one that people know about because they got him in the big trade with Cutter Gauthier, which I guess that's a whole can of worms to
Hmm.
open. We don't need to dive into that, but Drysdale's a good young defenseman. I mean, obviously they have some good pieces. How do you see the defense shaping up this year?
Well, really, the defense was a very surprising strength last year. I think a lot of people on the outside will be like, that doesn't look like a good defense. But if you really look at it, I mean, the offense wasn't scoring, and they were second worst in save percentage. So the outlier here is the defense. They played very well. Um, there are two guys in particular I want to look at, but overall, it's just a pretty solid core. There's a little bit of upside. I'm going to look at first Cam York. He's a player who he was a second pairing guy in 2022-23, and he gets that extra boost in terms of workload. His first real season as a first pairing defenseman, and he was pretty good. Um, there's a little bit more upside, I think, that he can unlock because you look at his offense. He sacrificed that to play more defensively oriented because he at the end of the year he was playing over 25 minutes a game from March to the end of the season. So he was really sacrificing that offense, limiting himself so he could play more defensively minded. He did score 30 points, which isn't bad, but you look at the more advanced metrics, he wasn't really providing that offense. It was more so his defensive partner, Travis Sanheim. So there's a lot of upside with Cam York. I think um, he showed that. He showed that before. He just didn't show that last season. So I think now that he's really used to that first pairing role, maybe we could see a boost in the offensive production. And that could really take the Flyers far. They could really use that
Yeah.
offense. Um,
It,
and also Jamie Drysdale. That's the other guy I want to look at. Very similar in terms of um, the boost, I guess, in offense. But Jamie Drysdale is his game is offense, particularly his skating is something the Flyers really haven't seen. I can't remember they've had a skater as good as he is. And we typically view skating as an offensive kind of asset, but he uses it for defense as well. I remember a play where he was skating back really fast to cover a player like Matt Barzal, who's very fast, and it works at both ends of the ice. And if he is healthy, which he wasn't, he was suffering a sports hernia, just like Couturier. But him, it was the entire season. He was never once healthy. The Flyers had not seen Jamie Drysdale at full health at what he can be. There is so much promise with a player like that. He's only 22 still, and he showed some promise on the power play. He was very good. He just didn't get the points. He'll figure that out if he can get the health in place. I think that can be a very good um, addition to your defense in a sense, because he really wasn't there last season. So yeah, I'm excited to see York Drysdale in particular and just see how that defense meshes together.
it really does feel like a unit that could be the difference maker for them. And it could, it's one of those things with the Flyers that when they traded Provorov, people are like, oh, they're going to fall apart defensively. And it ended up doing the opposite where they gave those young skaters some time. And this unit, I think it can actually it helps out their goaltending a lot to the point where it could cover up was, what was a weak link, what was something that they struggled with last year. And I guess like segueing into the goaltending a bit, what 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 is the state of the goaltending? We know what happened last year, where with Carter Hart, he was removed from the team, and they had Ersson. They kind of didn't really have a steady unit. So, I mean, with the defense helping out, how do you see the goaltending looking? How does it look heading into the season?
Well, it's so hard to predict the goaltending, particularly
Mhm.
because Ersson at his best, and we're talking about a pretty long span from about November 2nd to January 18th, he was at a 931 save percentage. He was really one of the best goaltenders in the league at that point for a good portion of the season when he was getting, starting every other game. He looked really, really good. He was really the starter at that point. And you wanted to see an increase in workload. And then the whole situation happened. And then after that, that's when things took a turn. He was starting, he went from starting every other game to every game, about like 85% of the games. And what happened there was I guess he got exhausted. He couldn't play like he was anymore. And the reason why he was playing so much is because the Flyers really didn't have a backup. Cal Peterson, they put him in very rarely. He didn't play well when he was put in. He wasn't even very good in the AHL. So you put a subpar AHL goalie in the NHL. Yeah, that didn't go well. Felix Sandstrom, another guy who was subpar in the AHL, and then they sent him up to the NHL. They just didn't have an option. Excuse me, not Kolosov. Well, I'll get into him in a little bit. Um, Fedotov, their backup now, he's a backup. They finally have a backup, at least they hope. There's a lot of question marks around him. He missed his entire 2022-23 season due to military service in Russia, which was just such a weird situation, of course, right? Um, and then in the KHL last season, he was okay, but again, he didn't play the year before, so it really is a huge wild card with him. But if he can be just play and maybe play good, then then Ersson can come in and be the starter and be what he can be instead of being overworked. So there's a lot of upside, but it could go bad. It really could go bad. Um, an AHL goalie that maybe could surprise some people is Alexei Kolosov if he's with the team. There's been some drama around whether he's terminating his contract because some homesickness. That's what some people are saying. It's just so many rumors that there's really no um, conclusive evidence as to what he's doing. But if he is in the AHL and maybe Fedotov struggles or maybe Ersson struggles, who knows? That could be a guy you look at, a young guy with some upside. But yeah, it's really an uncertain position, and that really is where the Flyers season boils down to. If they can have even average goaltending, I think, you could be looking at a pretty good team. But if they struggle again, then maybe they struggle as a team again.
So what is the plan slash should be the plan? Because I based on what last season showed, Ersson cannot take on not starting workload, but a majority, a huge surplus of starts. He's good when he split starts, which is what first half of the season was. And he's good if you can maybe make him a starter, but not the key starter or the one who you overwork. What should their plan be in that?
I mean, if I had to estimate, I would say Ersson gets around 50 games because he started around 50 last season, but he wasn't starting at all in October. He started like 2 games out of their first 9, and he didn't play well because he just wasn't getting in. And then he started, here and there, and then he started a ton. So it was all over the place. But if you can have a more cohesive workload, I think 50 works for him. Fedotov, I guess, would be around 30 in that sense. Ersson is your starter, barring anything, if he really, really struggles, which I don't expect, but it could happen. So yeah, but that's my plan, like a 50-30 type of workload.
Yeah. And I mean, if they figure out goaltending, it it's kind of one of the interesting things with the Flyers is that if they figure out goaltending, are they one of those teams that can surprise a lot of us in the Metro? Like last year in the first half of the season when they were in third place, everyone was like, are these the real Flyers? Or these the where where do you see where do you see the Flyers in general? And if they figure out goaltending, does that change our conversation? Is that the thing that if they change that, that change the conversation about them?
There are just so many factors. That's just one of them.
Yeah.
Everything can't go right for them. We can all say that, oh, their goaltending could be good and their center depth can be good, but things happen. Random things happen throughout a season that you really can't predict. But they were they weren't just some fluke team last season. They played extremely well at 5-on-5 and even strength. They dominated their opposition pretty much every game. The only issue was they didn't have the talent to really take advantage of chances. They didn't have the talent in goal toward the end of the season to make those big saves. So, I mean, I have them personally around they're going to be one of those teams to me that's competing for a playoff spot again. You look at teams like the Islanders, the Sabres, the Senators, all those teams, I think they're kind of in that mix. I mean, biasly, I'd probably have them a little bit ahead, but I think I'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're just kind of in that bubble range. You can't definitively put them in the playoffs, or really, to me, definitively put them out of the playoffs.
Yeah, it really feels that way, not just to the Metro, but the Eastern Conference in general. So we'll segue over to some quick fire questions, and with just the first thing comes to your mind, one sentence on each of these quick fire questions. First one, biggest storyline coming into the season for the season.
I think I talked about Michkov here with Tortorella. To me, that's the biggest storyline.
Biggest question mark.
Um, how Sean Couturier will do.
Any breakout stars or any breakout players who can surprise us?
Owen Tippett.
Tip it. One player who must bounce back after last season.
Scott Lawton.
Any X factors make or break the season?
Drysdale.
Surprise rookies or prospects who can take over this roster? Who can make the roster?
To me, their roster is mostly set, but I think Emil Andre could maybe make that step to the roster.
With that segueing over, any prospects in the AHL to monitor? Any prospects that they just drafted? Anyone in the pipeline to keep an eye out for?
To me, an underrated prospect, Carter Southern of the WHL for the Portland Winterhawks.
Right, any hot takes or bold predictions that you have in the back of your head?
We'll say that Drysdale gets 40 assists.
40 assists. I my bold prediction with the Flyers would be Matt Michkov. Really bursts on, becomes the next Kirill Kaprizov. That's something the Flyers would hope for. No one else in the Metro would be rooting for. All right, let's time for some predictions. Who on the forward unit leads the team in points?
I'll go with the conservative answer here and go Travis Konechny.
Is he leading them in goals and assists also?
Um, I'll say that he leads them in goals, and I'll say Drysdale leads them in assists because I said 40. So
So leading defenseman in points then. Is it
yeah, I
Drysdale?
guess it would be Drysdale.
All right. Prediction, where do you see them finishing at the end of the season?
All right. I've done predictions for pretty much all the teams. I've looked at everybody. I have them, you can call it bias, whatever. I have them eighth place in the conference, and I have them just squeaking into the playoffs with 97 points.
Who do you have them pass? Like who's right behind them? That's kind of what I'm curious, or who's right in front of them? Where are they sandwiched between? That's kind of what I'm curious.
So I have a lot of teams that are a lot of your contenders. Like they're kind of separated from the contenders. They're just kind of just ahead of these wild card teams like the Islanders. They could be in the mix. The Penguins, the Capitals, the Sabres, the Senators, all those teams. I'll say they just finished right ahead of those teams and behind teams like maybe the Devils, the Lightning, those kinds of teams.
I guess one last question is what could be the reason? What's the biggest thing that could keep them out of the playoffs? Or what's the issue that could hold them back this season?
Mainly injuries. I mean, that's for everybody, but they are particularly, there's a particular issue for the Flyers in terms of injuries.
Yeah, it seems like that. Not that they don't have depth, but if they lose a key player, it's
Mhm.
harder for them to cover up that issue than say another team, or other teams in the conference and really in the NHL would. I guess that's all we got. We covered pretty much everything. So thank you everyone for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and check out all of the content at the Hockey Writers. Check out our Substack content. Justin is a constant contributor to both the Flyers team page and the Substack page for the Flyers. And tune in next time for another great preview. Thank you.